Susan Atkins was convicted of first-degree murder for the deaths of 6 people: Gary Hinman, Stephen Parent, Jay Sebring, Abigail Folger, Wojtek Frykowski, and Sharon Tate. Susan was sentenced to death in the gas chamber in 1971, but that sentence was overturned a year later when the California Supreme Court temporarily abolished the death penalty. Atkins, along with her co-defendants, then had her sentence changed to life in prison with the possibility of parole. Susan Denise Atkins was born May 7, 1948, in San Gabriel, California. Her parents, Edward John Atkins, born 1920 in South Dakota, and Jean Frances Jett, born 1923 in Missouri, were drunks, and their home was filled with volatility. Susan had one older brother, John Michael Atkins, and one younger brother, Stephen. During her childhood, she was molested by her older brother. Susan's life was further turned upend at 14 when her mother died of cancer. John was in the Navy when their mom died, and Susan was expected to act as the mother within the family. Later, she began to dabble in recreational drugs. A frightening LSD trip in her teens did not deter her from continuing to numb herself with pharmaceuticals. When her father moved out of town, Susan was shuttled between relatives. She relocated to San Francisco and got involved with petty criminals, drug dealers, Satanists, all while putting herself in difficult personal situations. She hopped from man to man, always seeking someone who would take care of her. In the autumn of 1967, Susan and her friend Ella Jo Bailey were living with 2 men in an apartment at the intersection of Oak and Leon. Janis Joplin lived just a few doors away, and sometimes they heard her sing the blues from their kitchen. That season, Susan attended a party where she saw a short man with prison tattoos on both his forearms playing guitar. She drifted to him like a moth to a flame. 2 days later, she again encountered the man, 32-year-old Charles Manson, and followed him home, where he took off her clothes, placed her in front of a full-length mirror, told her she was beautiful, and made love to her. After sex, Charlie told Susan that he and the 3 women he was currently living with, Mary Berner, Lynette Frome, and Patricia Krenwinkel, were leaving San Francisco to travel in an old school bus. He invited her to join them. Over the next 2 years, Susan was a member of the so-called Manson Family, a communal anti-establishment collective that fell under Manson's persuasive manipulations. She had a son, born in October 1968, and then, in July 1969, she committed the first crime that led to her life sentence, the murder of musician Gary Hinman. 10 days later, she was part of the foursome that entered the property at 10050 Cielo Drive and killed the occupants there, including pregnant actress Sharon Tate. That fall, Susan blabbed about her exploits to inmates at Sybil Brand, the main women's jail in Los Angeles, which led to law enforcement finally solving the Tate LaBianca murders that had eluded them for months. In December 1969, Susan was the star witness at the grand jury for the Manson family and again bragged about her homicidal exploits. We now have reason to believe that much of what she told the grand jury was false. Susan likely did not make the final action that killed any of the Manson family victims. That is, however, not to say she wasn't directly involved in and responsible for their deaths. She, along with another member of the family, took turns holding a pillow over Gary Hinman's face after he was stabbed by a third member of the family. She ordered Sharon Tate, Jay Sebring, and Abigail Folger to enter the living room at Cielo Drive with a knife in her hand, where she assisted in tying them up, along with Chief Manson assassin Charles Tex Watson. Susan stabbed Wojtek Frykowski several times in the legs and wrestled with him when he fought her. She held Sharon Tate by knife while Frykowski and Folger were chased outside the home and stabbed to death on the lawn. But despite her later claims, Susan Atkins did not stab Sharon Tate. Charles Watson has claimed sole responsibility, writing that Susan froze when he first ordered her to kill Sharon, and so he pushed her aside and did the deed himself. Susan was guilty of many crimes during the events at Hinman's and Tate's homes. She was guilty of entrapment, kidnapping, theft, assault, and ultimately of murder. It didn't really matter that she didn't stab Sharon, although after a few years in prison, she tried to tell everyone that she didn't kill anyone. Are you guilty of murder if you don't technically take a life? Yes, if you contributed to their deaths, and Susan Atkins most definitely did. She deserved to serve time in prison for her crimes, although if she had told the truth initially, and then not switched her loyalty back to Manson after being pressured by the family following her grand jury testimony, she might have gotten less time ultimately. Susan seemed truly contrite during the 80s, 90s, and 2000s in interviews, in part because she had become a Christian and said that she felt redeemed despite her crimes. She also married a young law student, James Whitehouse. But her contrition paled in comparison with her previous claims, perhaps false, that she told Sharon Tate she didn't care about her and had no mercy on her and called her a bitch and licked Sharon's blood off her hand. It's no wonder that parole boards never knew what was the truth. They also didn't appreciate her poor behavior when it came to psychiatric assessments. Susan was argumentative and defensive and often refused to participate in these parole-mandated exams. One psychiatrist told the parole board in 2000, "I can only conclude, based upon the inmate's behavior, that she still has a serious problem with authority and has assumed an extremely adversarial approach to the psychiatric evaluation." During her June 2005 parole hearing, Susan faced the families of her victims, but she refused to speak about her crimes at her attorney/husband's advice. Had she spoken candidly and admitted what she was guilty of and apologized with real conviction, she may have won her release. Instead, she got a 3-year denial. In 2008, while exercising at a Curves gym in prison, Susan had a seizure. She was rushed to the infirmary where they diagnosed her with brain cancer. She was moved to the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla, north of Fresno. A leg amputation followed, and her health quickly declined. In 2009, her attorney-husband petitioned the court for a compassionate release, arguing that her medical needs far outweighed the punitive sentence she received so many years before, and that she was bedridden and unable to harm anyone. James Whitehouse made his case. Surprisingly, he had one very high-profile supporter, former prosecutor Vincent Bugliosi. He wrote a letter to the board which read, in part, "Just because Susan Atkins showed no mercy to her victims, we therefore are duty-bound to follow her inhumanity and show no mercy to her." Deborah Tate, sister of Sharon, who opposed release, told broadcaster Larry King, "I have all the compassion in the world for her. I wish her very well and always have. In jail, I hope that they thrive and provide a useful life to other inmates. But I can never trust that these people are rehabilitated. I'm not capable of hate. I feel bad that their lives have been wasted, but that was a choice that they made." Susan was denied her compassionate release. She died at the prison in Chowchilla on September 24th, 2009.